There's a particular kind of silence that happens at a shooting range when someone does something impossible. It isn't the silence between shots. Every shooter knows that silence is functional, focused, full of held breath and calculation. That silence has a job. This is different. This is the silence of 30 trained killers, men with more confirmed kills between them than some small wars, standing completely still, not because they've been ordered to, but because their bodies simply forgot to keep moving. I was there that day. I was there because I was supposed to be documenting a routine evaluation, filling out federal paperwork with federal pen, drinking federal coffee that tasted like it had been brewed sometime during the Clinton administration. I was not supposed to be standing with my mouth open, my clipboard dangling from 2 fingers, watching a 12-year-old girl dismantle every record on the board like she was doing homework. Her name was Mara. Nobody asked her name before it happened. That's the part that still gets me, 3 years later. 30 some of the most elite military minds in the country, and not one of them thought to ask her name before they dismissed her. They only learned it after. They only ever learn the names after. I want to tell you this story carefully, because it deserves that. Not because it's a story about a little girl who could shoot, though it is. Not because it's a story about pride getting demolitioned by a 68-pound 12-year-old, though it's very much that too. It's a story about what we decide a person is before we've looked at them. And what it costs us every single time we're wrong. What follows is told in 3 parts. I've reconstructed them from my field notes, my memory, and one conversation I had with Mara's father 2 years after that day, a conversation that ended with him staring out a window for a long time without saying anything, and me understanding, finally, that the silence at the range wasn't the most important silence in this story. That one was. The morning Mara showed up at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, I had a headache that started somewhere behind my left eye and had been moving toward the center of my skull since approximately 0430. I mention this only because I think it affected my perception. I was squinting at everything. The California sun off the tarmac. The whiteboard with the day's evaluation schedule. The face of Senior Chief Petty Officer Dale Rucker, who had a way of looking at you like he was performing a dental examination from 12 feet away. "You the Federal Observer," he said. "That's the one. You're early." I was told 0600. I know what you were told. He looked at my clipboard like it had personally wronged him. Evaluation starts at 0700. You can wait in the armory anteroom. There's coffee. There was coffee. I've described it already. It tasted like it had been filtered through institutional disappointment, but it was hot and it was there, which is all coffee really needs to be at that hour of the morning when you're sitting in a federal anteroom waiting to observe a SEAL qualification re-evaluation that you've been told, by 4 different people, is going to be completely routine. In my experience, when 4 different people tell you something is completely routine, it means they've either forgotten what routine means or they're lying. This time it was neither. The evaluation was routine right up until it wasn't. The range at Coronado runs 12 lanes. On a standard qualification day they use 8. That morning they were using 6, which Rucker explained to me as we walked the line was because 2 of the candidates had already been re-evaluated and cleared the previous week. The remaining 4, all operators in some stage of what I was told was a proficiency verification cycle, which I understood to mean they'd been flagged for some kind of recertification, were running through the standard Navy Special Warfare shooting battery. This means nothing to most people. Let me describe it in a way that does. The battery starts at 7 yards. You shoot the silhouette in the center mass. You hit it enough times and you move back. The distances increase 15 yards, 25, 50, and the targets change, the time windows narrow, and what was acceptable at close range becomes inadequate at distance. The final stage, the one that separates the operators who've stayed sharp from the ones who've been spending too much time behind a desk, is a timed qualification at the 100-yard line. Standing. No support. And the target, by that point, is the size of a dinner plate drawn in the center of a silhouette, and you have 15 seconds. Not the shooting itself. The finding, the raising, the acquisition, and the shooting. 15 seconds, total. I have watched trained soldiers who were not SEALs attempt this stage. they hit it maybe 70% of the time. The SEALs, that morning, were running about 93. Which sounds impressive and is, until you know that the institutional standard for continued certification is 90%, and the informal standard, the one that actually matters in the rooms where these men live, is something closer to perfect. So there was pressure. There is always pressure. What there was not, could not have been, by any institutional logic I've ever encountered, was a 12-year-old girl in lane 7. I saw her before Rucker did. This was only because I was standing at a different angle, watching the range officer run the final equipment check while Rucker reviewed the morning's paperwork. I had turned toward the lane assignments board more to have something to do with my eyes than because I needed the information, and that's when I saw her. She was standing at the equipment check station with her back to me. Small. Black hair pulled back in a braid that was slightly coming undone on the left side. Wearing a t-shirt from what appeared to be a middle school track team in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and cargo shorts that were just slightly too big for her, so they sat at the widest part of her hips and stayed there by negotiation rather than design. She was holding a Sig Sauer P226 in a two-handed grip, and the range safety officer was helping her adjust her stance, and the thing that struck me, before I had processed any of the other information, was that she wasn't nervous. Not performing calm. Not performing anything. She had the stillness of someone who had done this particular thing long enough that it had left the category of things that require management and entered the category of things that simply are. The way a surgeon holds a scalpel after 30 years. The way a musician places their hands on keys in a dark room. She checked the weapon, cleared it, handed it back to the safety officer, nodded once at something he said, and picked up the next one. I looked at my clipboard. I looked at the lane assignments board. Lane 7 was assigned to Ruiz M., guest evaluee. I had no idea what a guest evaluee was. I found out later that it's an informal designation used when a civilian is granted range access for demonstration, training observation, or, and this was the category Mara fell into, what the paperwork listed as special circumstance evaluation, non-certification. Meaning she wasn't there to qualify for anything. She was just there to shoot. Rucker saw her when he turned around. The expression on his face was, and I say this not unkindly, because I've watched it happen to people who were completely justified in having it, the expression of a man who has worked very hard to build a day in a particular shape and has just noticed that shape is wrong in a way he cannot immediately locate or fix. The hell, he said. This was not a question. Lane 7, I said. I see lane 7. He walked toward her. Not aggressive, he was a professional, and professionals don't lead with aggression on a range full of weapons and federal observers, but with the particular energy of a man who has a question that requires an immediate answer. I followed at what I judged to be a respectful distance. She heard him coming. Turned before he said anything. Looked up at him. He was 6'2", she was maybe 4'8" on a good day, without any of the shrinking that you might expect from a 12-year-old being walked toward by a man of that size wearing that much authority. You Ruiz? Rucker said. Mara, she said. Last name Ruiz? Yes, sir. He looked at the range safety officer, who pointed at a man standing near the equipment cage at the far end of the range. The man was leaning against the cage with his arms crossed, watching. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans, a worn gray shirt, and his posture had the specific quality of someone who has deliberately made himself as physically small and unobtrusive as possible while still being 6 feet tall and built like a load-bearing wall. Rucker walked toward him. I followed Rucker. The man at the cage extended a hand. Chief Warrant Officer Marcus Ruiz, he said. Retired. Rucker shook it. The handshake had the quality of two tectonic plates meeting. She your daughter? Yes. She's 12. Turned 12 in March. Rucker looked back at Mara, who had returned to her lane and was doing something with her earmuffs. She's not on my evaluation list. No, she's not. Commander Teller arranged the access. Ruiz didn't elaborate. He didn't elaborate in the way that people who have learned that elaboration is usually counterproductive don't elaborate. She's just here to shoot. I know that. Rucker turned fully toward him now. I'm asking why. Marcus Ruiz looked at his daughter for a moment. Then, he looked back at Rucker. "Because she's better than everyone on your list," he said. "And, I wanted somebody to see it. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think the honest version is more interesting than the version that becomes legend." Nobody believed him. This is not a character flaw unique to these men. It is a structural feature of expertise, a cognitive tax levied on everyone who has spent long enough being right that their pattern recognition starts doing their thinking for them. Rucker had seen thousands of shooters. He had watched operators who'd spent 20 years in the field and, he knew, in his muscle memory as much as his mind, what excellent looked like, and it did not look like a 12-year-old girl in track shorts with a braid coming loose on the left side. The men on the line, the 4 operators running their qualification, had been told there was a guest evaluee in lane 7. They had been told nothing else. I watched them register her and, then, file her away in a mental category that people file things when they don't know how else to categorize them. One of them, a man named Petty Officer Second Class Decker, tall, with the kind of face that was probably friendly in private and, permanently arranged into professional neutrality in professional spaces, actually laughed. Not cruelly. I want to be clear. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was a really laugh. A that's new laugh. The laugh of a man encountering something he hadn't expected in a context where surprises are usually considered bad news. Mara didn't hear it. Or heard it and filed it somewhere I couldn't see. The qualification battery began. The first stage is 7 yards. Center mass, double tap, controlled pairs. It is the closest thing the battery has to a warm-up, the distance at which almost every trained shooter is near perfect, the stage that exists mostly to establish rhythm. Mara shot it in 3 seconds. The target came back to the line and the range officer checked it. Both rounds had gone through the same hole. This got a look from the range officer. Not a reaction, a look. The practiced neutrality of a man doing his job. With one small deviation, I held breath longer than usual before he posted the result. Nobody on the line had noticed yet. They were running their own stages. I noticed. I noted it on my clipboard, which I had been using less for federal documentation and more for personal record keeping since approximately 5 minutes into this morning. 15 yards. Timed. Single shots, rhythm counted, not rushed. She took her stance. Adjusted her grip, slightly, the way you adjust a steering wheel, not because it was wrong, just because there is always a more perfect position that patience finds. Drew a breath. Shot 6 rounds in 3.5 seconds. 6 holes in the target. The grouping was the size of a fist. Not a large fist. Decker was watching now. He had finished his own stage, he'd shot cleanly, 94%, well above threshold, and, when he pulled off his earmuffs and turned toward the scoring table, he happened to face lane 7. He stood there for a moment with his earmuffs in his hand and his qualification card in the other hand and looked at the target coming back on the cable, and I watched the friendly and private face do something complicated. He didn't say anything. He put his earmuffs back on and went back to his lane. 25 yards was where people started paying attention. Not obviously. Nobody stopped their own work or crowded the lane or did any of the things you might imagine from the way people reconstruct this story afterward, as if it were a crowd scene in a movie, everyone frozen in shock. It wasn't like that. It was more like a gradual reorientation. The way iron filings move when you bring a magnet slowly across the table. Nothing dramatic. Just a shift in the direction things were pointing. By the time Mara finished the 25-yard stage, every active shooter on the line had noted her score at least once. And, the thing that was making the iron filings move wasn't just the score. It was the way she shot. Most excellent shooters have something urgent in their process. Even the controlled ones, the technically precise ones, there is something in the mechanics of elite performance that reads as intensity, as effort, as a person working at the edge of what they can do. Mara shot the way children eat cereal. With complete, bovine, meditative ease. Her breathing didn't change. Her stance didn't shift compensate, it just was. She found the target the way you find the light switch in your own bedroom. muscle memory so deep it had gone past the muscle. At 25 yards, her grouping was tighter than Decker's 15-yard grouping. Rucker, standing behind the line, said nothing. But he had stopped consulting his paperwork about 10 minutes ago, and his coffee cup was in his hand at an angle that suggested he had forgotten it existed. 50 yards. I will describe this stage by describing what I was writing on my clipboard, because I think my documentation, which was becoming less federal by the minute, captures what was happening more accurately than my memory does. 0814, 50-yard stage. Ruiz M, consistent with prior stages. Grouping, tennis ball diameter, lower right quadrant of kill zone. Slightly right bias as compensation for something in her grip or possibly wind. Cleared stage in 4.1 seconds. Then, below that, with a different pressure on the pen, the 4 operators are watching. Not all at once. Never all at once. They look then, look away then, look again. Rucker has put his coffee down. And, below that, barely legible because I was writing quickly, I think I need to call my supervisor. I didn't call my supervisor. I stayed. Obviously. You stay for the 100-yard line. There was a break before the final stage equipment check, a brief range cold while the targets were reset. The operators clustered at the water station. I watched Decker say something to the man beside him, a compact Louisianan named Petty Officer Arsenault, who moved with the quiet efficiency of something that had been designed for a specific purpose and refined past the point of any unnecessary motion. Arsenault looked at lane 7. She's 12, Decker said, quietly enough that I only caught it because I was closer than he realized. Arsenault shrugged one shoulder. So she's 12. Man, Arsenault said, she ain't 12 when she's behind that lane. She's whatever that grouping says she is. Decker didn't have an answer for that. I felt something with that, watching him not have an answer. A recognition. Not of him specifically but, of the mechanism, the way a person's categories can stand very firm right up until the moment they don't, and then, they just open. Like a door that was never locked, just assumed to be. Marcus Ruiz, during all of this, had not moved from the equipment cage. I walked over during the range cold. Not with any particular professional purpose. Curiosity, mostly. The personal kind. How long has she been shooting? I asked. He thought about it. Not the way you think about an answer you're calculating, the way you think about something that has a specific emotional weight. Since she was 5, he said. But, seriously, since she was 8. What changed at 8? He looked at me for a moment. I had the impression of someone deciding how much of a door to open. Her mother died, he said. She needed somewhere to go. He looked back at the range. At Mara, who was standing in her lane with her back to us, resettling her earmuffs, doing something that looked like a small personal ritual, right earmuff first, then left, then one small roll of her neck. She went to the range, he said. Every day after school. Stayed until I came to pick her up. He didn't elaborate. True to form. He didn't need to. Blood money lives in 2 words, and grief lives in every day after school. I didn't ask anything else. 100 yards. Dinner plate target. 15 seconds. No support. I have stood at a 100-yard line. I am not a shooter by training or profession, but I have stood there and looked at what you're supposed to hit from that distance, and I'll tell you what I tell anyone who hasn't done it, it is a different kind of problem. It isn't just distance. It's the accumulation of every small variable you've been managing since you picked up the weapon: grip, breath, the microscopic tremble in your forearms, the arc of the round, the wind that exists or doesn't exist, all of them compressing down to a single point in space that you need to find and hit before the clock finishes its business. 15 seconds. The range officer called the stage. The 4 operators took their positions. Mara took hers. She was the second to shoot. Decker was first. He'd drawn a lower assignment number, and I watched him take his stance with the deliberate calm of a man who has done this enough times that calm is no longer a choice, it's a setting. He raised. He shot. 4 rounds. The target came back and the range officer posted, for a 4, all inside the dinner plate. A clean stage. A professional stage. The range officer called lane 7. Mara raised the weapon. There is a thing I read once about the difference between novice shooters and expert shooters that I think about now, watching her at that moment. Novice shooters, when they're aiming, are thinking about aiming. They're managing the sight picture consciously, working through the checklist, fighting their own fine motor systems for control. Expert shooters aim the way lungs breathe. It has gone past the cortex. Past decision. Into the deep mechanical certainty of a body that has run the same program so many thousands of times it no longer needs to run it consciously. She raised the weapon and I saw in the 2 seconds before she fired that she wasn't aiming. She was waiting. For something so quiet and interior that I couldn't name it from 20 feet away. The moment when all the variables stack up into alignment, the way you wait for a wave before you jump. She was waiting for the wave. She found it. 6 shots. Faster than the clock required. And, when the target came back, the silence. That silence. Not the silence between shots. The other one. The range officer looked at the target. Then, he looked at it again. Then, he held it up toward the light from the range doorway, as if maybe the angle was affecting his judgment. 6 holes. Inside the dinner plate. The grouping was the size of a silver dollar. Decker, who was standing with his own scored target in his hand, looked at lane 7's target, and then, at Decker's target, and then, with the particular expression of a man who has spent his whole professional life understanding that pride and accuracy cannot both survive certain moments, he set his own target face down on the table. Nobody told him to. He just did. Rucker walked to the end of the line. He stood at lane 7 for a long moment. Then, he turned toward the equipment cage, toward Marcus Ruiz, who was still standing where he'd been standing for 2 hours, arms crossed, back against the cage, watching. Rucker didn't say anything. He was a man who understood precision. He knew what the numbers said. He knew what the comparison said. He knew what it meant when a 12-year-old girl with a coming undone braid and a middle school track shirt just shot a tighter grouping at 100 yards than his 4 certified operators had shot collectively at 50. He knew all of this. He just stood there with it for a moment, in the way that sometimes a piece of information has to find a place to live in you before you can speak around it. Marcus Ruiz uncrossed his arms. Not as a gesture. Not as a concession. Just because he was tired and he'd been standing for 2 hours and he was a retired man watching his daughter do the thing she was made to do, and there was no more watching and waiting left in the morning. He walked toward Rucker. They stood together at the end of lane 7. Rucker said, "She needs formal training. ASAP." Ruiz said, "I know." There was something under that exchange that I did not have language for then, and I'm not sure I do now. 2 men standing in the specific place where what one of them knew and what the other one was only now understanding had just become the same country. No ceremony for that. No ribbon cutting. Just, I know. Yes. I stood in the anteroom afterward, writing up my federal report. The coffee machine was still producing something. I poured a cup. I didn't drink it. I kept thinking about what Marcus Ruiz had said she needed somewhere to go, and about the image of an 8-year-old girl, braid probably coming undone then, too, standing at a range with her father after school, every school day, working out something that I think had nothing to do with targets. Or everything to do with them. I wrote my federal report. I documented the stage results. I noted the guest evaluee and the informal guest evaluation and the scores. I used professional language and precise numbers. Then, at the bottom, in a section marked Additional Observer Notes, I wrote one sentence that my supervisor later asked me to remove for being outside the scope of documentation. I kept a copy. The records set today were not the most important thing that happened in this range. Continues in Part 2, What Records Are Made Of. 14 months after the morning at Coronado, a Naval Special Warfare Command training memorandum circulated internally. I was forwarded a copy by my supervisor with a sticky note that said, "You may recognize a name." The memo was about a guest evaluation that had been formalized into a training observation protocol. It was about a revised junior shooter assessment pipeline that had been recommended by 3 senior training officers. And it was, eventually, about a girl who had agreed to return to Coronado, this time not as a guest, not as a curiosity, but as a formal evaluation benchmarker. The Navy's language for this was characteristically bloodless. Ruiz, Mara, Civilian Specialist, Benchmark Calibration Program, Class 1 Provisional. What it meant, translated out of institutional, they were using her scores as the baseline against which the program's best candidates would now measure themselves. 14 years old. A benchmark. I went back to Coronado. The range was different now. Not physically, same 12 lanes, same armory smell, same coffee that I had accepted as a permanent condition of federal observation work. Different in a way that I can only describe as oriented differently. The first time I'd come, the range had been arranged around what the SEALs were doing. The guest evaluee in Lane 7 had been a parenthesis. A curiosity at the margins of the day's main text. Now the range was arranged around Mara. Not sycophantically. Not the way an audience arranges around a performer. The way a laboratory arranges around an experiment, precisely, with purpose, with the understanding that every variable matters. There were 14 candidates in the evaluation cohort. I had reviewed their files on the drive from the airport. Some of the most promising young operators in the pipeline, men and women who had passed every physical, cognitive, and tactical assessment to reach this stage. 2 had prior competitive shooting experience. 1 had been a state champion. They were, by any meaningful measure, exceptional. They knew about Mara. I watched them watching her during the pre-range brief. This is the thing I want to be honest about, the thing that doesn't make it into the cleaner versions of this story. She had not become easy to watch. She had become stranger to watch. Harder in a specific way. At 12, her shooting had been, in the moment of witnessing it, almost comprehensible. It looked like prodigy. It looked like the thing you call a gift when you don't want to account for the work. Children who are exceptional in childhood have a particular quality that lets you receive their exceptionalism as a kind of magic trick. Something to be amazed by. Something that doesn't require you to locate it inside the logic of human effort. At 14, the magic trick quality was gone. What was there instead was something more uncomfortable. What was there was craft. And the craft was visible. And visible craft is harder than magic, because craft means work, and work means choice, and choice means that every operator in that room with a file that said exceptional had to sit with the fact that this 14-year-old girl had made choices they hadn't made, spent hours they hadn't spent, and arrived at a place that was several clear miles past where they were standing. The state champion, his name was Levitt, a broad-shouldered 23-year-old from Wyoming with the kind of confidence that comes from having been the best thing in most rooms for most of his life, sat through the pre-brief with his arms crossed and a set to his jaw that I recognized. It was the jaw of a man preparing to be proven wrong. He knew it. He was preparing for it. And preparation is its own form of respect, even when it looks like armor. Mara arrived 10 minutes into the brief. I learned later that the lateness was logistical. She'd been at school, a regular middle school in San Diego by this point, and her father had picked her up directly and driven from the school to the base. She came in still wearing her school backpack, which the range officer took from her at the door with the practiced ease of someone for whom this was already a routine. She sat down in the back of the briefing room. She had a notepad. Not an issued one, the spiral-bound kind you get at a drugstore. She was taking notes. In the back of the room, in the middle of a federal training brief that she had almost certainly absorbed versions of at least 30 times before, she was taking notes in a drugstore notepad with a green pen. Levitt turned around and looked at her. She didn't look up. She was writing. He turned back. I spoke to Marcus Ruiz during the pre-range equipment check. He was in the same position as 14 months ago, near the back, out of the way, deliberate about taking up as little space as possible. He'd told me once that he tried to be invisible at these things. That he was afraid of what it would mean for her if people thought she was an extension of him rather than a thing that had grown entirely from itself. "How is she?" I asked. Same, he said. And, school? He did the almost smile. She has friends now. The range made her weird for a while and, then, it made her interesting. Kids are, he paused. Adaptable. Is she nervous today? He looked at me like this was a question from a different planet. No, he said. She's never nervous. He stopped again. Started again. That's the part one don't fully understand, even now. The range is the one place she isn't nervous. About anything. Since Diane died he stopped. I didn't push. He looked at the range. She goes somewhere when she's behind that lane. Somewhere I can't see. I think it's the only place she goes that she doesn't bring me. He said this without bitterness. As fact. The specific tenderness of a father recounting honestly for the places in his child's interior landscape where he does not exist. The evaluation battery was expanded from the standard version I'd observed 14 months earlier. The benchmark calibration program had added 2 additional stages, a moving target stage at 25 yards, which required both lateral tracking and triggering at precise intervals, and a stress condition stage at 50 yards following a simulated physical exertion sequence, heart rate elevated, hands not fully steady, the body working against the skill. These stages had been added, I was told, because the standard battery had been, and this is verbatim from the memorandum, insufficient to produce meaningful differentiation among candidates at the upper end of the performance distribution. Meaning, the old test had a ceiling, and somebody had blown through it, and now they needed a new ceiling. The new ceiling was designed around Mara's previous scores. The irony of this was not lost on anyone. You could see it in the room. A test designed to be harder than one person's performance, with that person sitting in the back row taking notes with a green pen. Moving targets. Levitt went first, by draw. He shot with the focused intensity of someone who had prepared for exactly this moment. His tracking was excellent, not perfect, but excellent. He absorbed 4 of 5 marks in the time window. The range officer's expression remained professional. 4 of 5 was, by the standard of every evaluation I had observed at this facility over the past year and a half, a strong result. Mara shot last. The target moved. Her weapon followed. She didn't chase it the way most shooters chase moving targets, with a slight lag, always behind, always correcting. She anticipated. She was already where the target was going. She shot the way you catch something you know is falling before it falls. 5 of 5. The range officer marked it without ceremony. He had learned not to react. He had learned this, I think, the hard way. Levitt's jaw was doing the thing again. Between stages, during the range cold, she was sitting on the bench near lane 7, her bench, it seemed, by some informal protocol, and she was back to the notepad. I walked over. She looked up. She had her father's eyes, the same quality of assessment in them, the same measurement taking. But, where Marcus Ruiz's eyes were contained, still waters, Mara's had something moving under them. Something that hadn't found its shape yet. What are you writing? I asked. She showed me the notepad. Numbers. Lots of numbers. Timing notations. Margin calculations. Something that looked like a self-assessment grid each stage, her own evaluation of what she'd done right and what she'd compensated for and what she'd need to adjust. I moved too early on the 3rd pass, she said. I anticipated wrong. I got lucky. I looked at the range officer's scoring card. 5 of 5. The highest mark of the day. You hit 5 of 5. I know. I still moved too early. It worked because the wind shifted. She tapped the notepad. Next time I need to wait for the second tracking indicator. Not the first one. I looked at her for a moment. Do you know that there's nobody in this cohort tracking at that level of self-evaluation? I said. She tilted her head. Not dismissive. Genuinely curious. What level are they tracking at? Outcome level. They're evaluating whether they hit the mark. You're evaluating your process regardless of outcome. She thought about this. Looked at the notepad. I learned that from my dad, she said. He says outcomes are what happened. Process is what you control. If you only track outcomes, you end up not knowing what to fix. She said this the way you say something that has been true for so long it has stopped feeling like wisdom and started feeling like weather. The stress condition stage. This was the one I'd been most curious about. The physical exertion element, 2 minutes of high-intensity movement, mandated heart rate threshold verification, then, immediate transition to the 50-yard line, was the closest the battery came to replicating field conditions. The thing it tested wasn't just shooting skill. It tested what happened to shooting skill when the body was doing everything it could to undermine it. Most shooters lost 2 to 3% accuracy. Good shooters lost 1%. The best, the ones who had trained so specifically for this transition that their nervous systems had learned to wall the physical state from the technical one, lost almost nothing. I had never seen anyone gain accuracy in this stage. The candidates ran the circuit. Levitt came off the exertion element with his chest heaving and, his hands, I could see from where I stood, carrying a slight tremor. He controlled it. He shot 3 of 5 inside the dinner plate. A good number. A human number. Mara ran the circuit. I watched her come off the exertion element. Her chest was moving faster. Her hands, I watched for the tremor and found it, small, there. It was there. She stood at the 50-yard line for 3 seconds. I watched her find the wave. She shot 5 of 5. Tighter than her stress-free stage 14 months ago. The silence. Different from the last time. Not the silence of people who haven't been paying attention suddenly, paying attention. This was the silence of people who had been paying very close attention and had run out of the kind of paying attention that generates noise. Levitt took off his earmuffs. He set them down on the bench. He walked to the scoring table, and he looked at his own card, and then he looked at Lane 7's card, and then he did something I did not expect from a 23-year-old former state champion from Wyoming who had spent his entire life being the exceptional one in the room. He laughed. Not the really? Laugh from 14 months ago. Not the dismissive one, the surprised one. A real laugh. The kind that happens when something is so far outside what you prepared for that your body doesn't have another response. Okay, he said. To nobody specifically. To the range, maybe. Okay. And he picked up his card and his earmuffs and he walked back to the bench and sat down next to Mara. She looked at him. You moved early on the third pass, she said. Moving target, stage 2. You tracked the first indicator instead of waiting for the second. He stared at her. You were watching my stage, he said. I watch everyone's stage. She held up the notepad. I take notes. Levitt looked at the notepad. Then, he looked at the front of the range, at nothing particular. Then, he said, with the specific deliberateness of a man deciding to mean something, can I see your notes? That moment, unremarkable in footage, barely worth a line in my official documentation, is the one I keep returning to. Not the records. Not the scores. Not the tighter groupings and the stress condition stage and the expanded battery and the benchmark ceiling designed around a 14-year-old's capacity and, then, broken by that same 14-year-old. Not any of that. The moment when a man who had spent 23 years being the one people learned from looked at a green notepad held by a girl half his age and asked, with no performance in it at all, can I see your notes? That's the mechanism. That's the thing that actually runs under all of it. Not the record. The willingness to ask. After the evaluation, I found Rucker. He had not been running this session, he was observing, as a senior training officer, which meant he'd been standing at the back with his clipboard the whole time and I knew he'd been watching because I'd checked twice. What are you thinking? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. He was a man who chose silences the way surgeons choose instruments, specifically, for a reason. When I was coming up, he said, there was a phrase we used. For the ones who were going to be special. Already there. As in, they haven't done the work yet, but they're already there. He looked at the range. I've only used that phrase 4 times in 16 years, he said. I don't use it lightly. And? I said. He looked at me. She was already there at 12, he said. Now she's somewhere else. He didn't have a name for where somewhere else was. Neither did I. But there was something in the way he said it, not with admiration exactly, not just admiration, that had the quality of a person standing at the edge of their own map and looking into territory they don't have words for yet. I drove back from the base in late afternoon light, the kind that makes San Diego look like a painting someone made to convince you California is worth it. I thought about Marcus Ruiz standing at the equipment cage saying she needed somewhere to go. I thought about the 8-year-old going to the range every day after school. About grief finding a form, the way grief always eventually does, not into something else, not into something clean, but into something that can carry it. The way a river doesn't get rid of what it carries. It just keeps moving with it. And I thought about something Mara had said to me, in the break between stages, that I had written down at the bottom of my notepad in the margin beside my federal documentation. I'd asked her, I'm not sure what made me ask it, some instinct, some curiosity about the interior geography her father couldn't see, what she was thinking about when she was at the 100-yard line. In those 3 seconds before she found the wave and fired. She'd thought about the question for a moment. Nothing, she said. Then, no, that's not right. It's more like everything goes quiet and there's just the target and she paused. I'm just talking to her. She said it casually. The way you say something that has been private so long it almost doesn't feel like disclosure. I didn't ask who her was. I think she knew I wouldn't. The federal documentation I filed the following week noted the benchmark results, the expanded protocol, the cohort performance, and the recommendation for continued observation. My supervisor approved it. He also, this time, let me keep the additional observer note. It read, the mechanism of exceptional performance in this subject is not technical. Recommend review of assessment frameworks that conflate technical output with the conditions that produce it. He probably thought it was a policy note. It wasn't. Continues in part 3, the name on the board, the record board at Coronado is not glamorous. I want to establish this up front because the way it gets described in the versions that circulate afterward, the online versions, the versions told at recruitment ceremonies, the version a Navy captain cited in a congressional hearing 3 years after everything I'm about to describe, it sounds like a monument. A thing etched in marble. A permanent declaration of what the best human shooting performance has looked like at one of the most demanding training facilities in the world. It's a whiteboard. A laminate whiteboard in the hallway between the armory and the main range building, next to a bulletin board that usually holds equipment sign-out sheets and a laminated color photo of someone's dog that has been there so long nobody remembers whose dog it was. The record board has columns for discipline, distance, score, name, and date. Someone updates it with dry erase marker. It has been updated in dry erase marker at least twice with Mara Ruiz's name. This is the part of the story that gets the congressional hearings and the online headlines and the photographs of the board that people screenshot and share. And I understand the appeal. I'm not dismissing it. There is something genuinely astonishing about looking at a list of names, career military, certified operators, people who have done this professionally for decades, and finding, next to the highest scores, a name that first appeared on that board when its owner was 12 years old. But the version of this story I want to tell is the one that happened the day the board got updated for the third and final time. Because the board is not the story. The board is what happens after the story ends. The story is what ended. She was 16 by then. I got the call from Rucker, a genuine, personal call, not a federal notification, which told me something about how the morning's evaluation was being received on a Tuesday. She's running the full battery today, he said. Not the benchmark program. The full certification battery. She's not old enough to certify. No. But we're running it anyway. A pause. We're running it as a comparative evaluation. For the record. The record board. Yes. I drove to Coronado. The parking situation at the base had not improved in 4 years. I sat in the lot for 10 minutes, which I spent looking at my notes from the first 2 evaluations and thinking about what 4 years meant, in numbers. 4 years ago, 8-year-old Mara Ruiz had needed somewhere to go. 8 years of showing up. Every day after school. Her father dropping her off, picking her up, the green notepads accumulating. She'd told me once that she kept them all, in boxes under her bed, hundreds of sessions of self-evaluation and process notation and the private conversation she was having at the end of every 100-yard stage. She was 16. She had been doing this for more than half her life. The base had a different quality this morning. I noticed it as soon as I cleared the gate, a density of attention, a slight departure from the institutional efficiency that usually ran Coronado like a very calm machine. More people in transit between buildings than was usual for 0630. More faces that track me as I walk through. Word had spread in the way that institutional words spread officially nowhere, actually everywhere. The ante-room was full. Not with candidates. There were no candidates today. The cohort evaluation had been separate, earlier in the week. Today was a single-subject evaluation, and the ante-room was full of observers, training officers, senior enlisted, 2 people I didn't recognize who turned out to be from Naval Special Warfare Command itself. The federal coffee had been replaced with something from an actual coffee machine. I noted this as significant. Rucker was at the front. He looked the same as he had 4 years ago, which I think was a deliberate professional choice as much as a biological fact. He had the bearing of a man who has decided that certain things about himself will remain constant regardless of what changes around them. "She's in the armory," he said. "How is she?" I asked her that 20 minutes ago. "And?" She said. He stopped. She said she slept well. He said it the way you repeat something when you're still working out what it means. I found Marcus Ruiz in the same place. Equipment cage, same position, same arms crossed, economy of presence. 4 years older. More gray in his hair. Same eyes. I hadn't seen him since the second evaluation. We had exchanged a few emails, brief, professional, the kind that contain more in their formality than in their content. I knew, from those emails, that the past 4 years had held both the things you hope for and the things you can't prevent. Mara was doing well in school. She was taking AP classes and complaining about AP English because she said the books the teachers chose were, verbatim, more concerned with the appearance of meaning than with actual meaning. She had a best friend named Pauline who apparently had no interest in firearms but came to the range sometimes anyway and read on her phone and shared her lunch. She had also, in the 3rd year, been in the hospital for a week with a respiratory infection that had been nothing, and then something, and then 3 very quiet days where Marcus had sat in a chair next to a bed in a Coronado hospital and understood, in a cellular way he couldn't unlearn, what it meant to have only one person left. He hadn't told me this. I inferred it from the email he sent after she was discharged, which was the shortest email I had received in 4 years of documentation work. "She's home. She's good. She's annoyed at the doctors for the dietary restrictions. Thank you for checking in. She's home. First. Before she's good. Before she's annoyed. She's home." I had documented that email in my personal notes. Not the federal ones. "How are you?" I asked him. He looked at me. "She wants to talk to you after," he said. "She asked me to tell you." "She did?" "She has something she wants to say." He paused. "She wouldn't tell me what." "She said it was for the Observer." The Observer. That's what she'd called me the first time, at 12, in the range anteroom. I had introduced myself with my full title and she'd looked at me and said, "You're the Observer, right?" And I'd said yes and she'd said okay and gone back to her notepad. The title had stuck. I had stopped minding it within about 30 seconds. The full certification battery. I won't detail every stage the way I did in the first evaluation, because you know the shape of it by now, the progression, the distances, the demands. You know what it asks. What I want to tell you about is the one moment in the full battery that is not present in the benchmark program. A stage the senior training officers call, in institutional language, the judgment condition. In the judgment condition, the target is not a silhouette. The target is a detailed scenario photograph, a freeze-frame image of a real-world situation with multiple figures. Some figures are threats. Some are not. The shooter has 12 seconds to assess and engage the correct targets while leaving the correct figures unengaged. It tests not just shooting skill but the judgment that shooting skill is actually in service of. Who to hit. Who not to. Why. Fast. It is, in every meaningful sense, the stage that tests whether a shooter is good at shooting or whether they're good at the thing shooting is a tool for. Myra had never run this stage. I sat with that. I'd been sitting with it since Rucker's call. The benchmark program had given her every technical challenge available. This was the first stage that would demand something else, not training, not process, not the accumulated daily practice of 8 years. Something harder. Judgment. She came out of the armory at 0720. Wearing jeans and a dark blue sweatshirt. Braid still slightly undone on the left side, which I had come to understand was not inattention but preference. She'd had it tight once, she'd told me in year 3, and it made her head hurt after 2 hours of concentrated shooting, so she'd started leaving it loose on the left and it had become, without intention, a constant. The anteroom cleared to the range floor. She walked through it without looking at the assembled observers, not out of dismissiveness but out of the focused interiority that I had by now spent 4 years watching and still couldn't fully account for. She looked at me. Nodded once. I nodded back. She put on her earmuffs right first, left second, one small roll of the neck and went to lane 7. The technical stages ran the way they had always run. Clean. Faster than the certification standard. The groupings that made range officers look twice. The stress condition stage. The moving targets. Levitt, who was now a full operator and had been in the building since 0600 and had no official reason to be there, standing at the back of the observer line with his arms crossed and an expression of what I can only describe as proprietary pride, the way you feel proud of a place you've been that not everyone gets to go. And then, the judgment condition. The photograph went up. 12 seconds. I watched her scan it. The image was a street scene. I learned later it was a composite training image, deliberately ambiguous, designed to produce exactly the kind of deliberation that makes this stage the one most operators find hardest. Figures in different positions, different orientations, partial obstructions. The threat designation was not obvious. It required assessment. She was still. 3 seconds. 4. The image stayed up. She wasn't firing. The range officer's posture shifted slightly. Not with impatience, with attention. This was the point at which most shooters had already fired. 5 seconds. 6. I watched her eyes move across the image. Not panicked. Working. 7 seconds. She fired. 2 shots. 2 specific figures. 2 specific locations. She lowered the weapon. The range officer went to the target assessment station. I watched him work through the evaluation. He had a protocol: threat identified, engaged, confirmed, non-threat left, confirmed, scoring against the certified assessment key. He looked up. 2 for 2, he said. Both threats engaged, both non-threats unengaged. And then, with the specific quality of a man saying something that surprises even him, both shots placed to minimize collateral impact on the non-threat figures. Not just correct. Precise in a way the protocol didn't require but the actual situation would have demanded. The silence. 3rd time. Different from the other 2, again. Not the silence of people paying attention. Not the silence of people running out of noise. This was the silence of a room full of people who had just watched something connect, not a record, not a number, not a grouping on a target, but a choice. The choice that the shooting was always in service of. The one that can't be trained in the same way grip can be trained or breath control can be trained. The one that lives somewhere past technique and whatever it is that makes a person see a room full of other people and understand who is and isn't a threat and be right about it in 6 seconds under a clock. Rucker, in 16 years, had used the phrase already there 4 times. I watched him standing at the back of the range, and I watched him open his mouth and close it, and then I watched him take a breath, and I think, though I had no way to confirm this and he never said so directly, I think he was running out of phrases. She walked off the range. She found me in the anteroom. She was still holding the green notepad. Current edition, she told me in year 3 that she was on her 14th. I'd asked if she still kept the old ones. Under the bed, she'd said. All of them. She sat down across from me. She looked like someone with something specific to say and the patience to say it correctly. I wanted to tell you something, she said. Because you were there the first time. Okay. She looked at the notepad. Then, back at me. I know why people come here, she said. To Coronado. To the program. I know what it means for them, what they're training for. What they're going to do with it. She paused. It's not the same for me. I know that. I know that's why they have the guest designation and the benchmark program and all of it. I'm not, she stopped. Restarted. I'm not training for what they're training for. Then, what are you training for? I asked. She thought about it for a long time. Not because she didn't know. I had the sense she'd known for years. She was thinking about how to say it to me. At the range, she said. At 100 yards. In those 3 seconds. I told you once I was talking to her. I remember. I still do that. Every time. She looked at the notepad. It doesn't feel like grief anymore. It feels like she turned the notepad over in her hands. Like I built a room. And I go there. And she's there. And neither of us has to say anything because the target says it for us. She set the notepad on the bench between us. I'm going to stop coming here, she said. After today. I looked at her. Not forever, she said. I don't know what forever means yet. But there's something I need to go find that isn't here. I don't know what it is. I know it isn't here. She looked toward the range door. My dad knows. He doesn't know I know he knows. She picked the notepad back up. I wanted someone to write it down, she said. That I was here. That I did this. And that it wasn't about the board. She said it simply. Without drama. The way you say things that are true enough that they don't need decoration. I wrote it down. The record board was updated that afternoon. Dry erase marker. Someone had given the board a new frame sometime in the past year, black metal, small. It looked a little more like a monument than it used to. The dog photo was still there. 3 entries. 3 stages. 3 scores next to Ruiz. M. Levitt looked at the board for a long time. He had a coffee cup. He was drinking the good coffee. She said she's done, he said. For now. She's 16. I know. He looked at the board. She'll be back. Maybe. He was quiet for a moment. Then, you know what the weird thing is? The part nobody talks about? I waited. The judgment stage, he said. She fired at 7 seconds. I asked the range officer, that's 2 full seconds after the standard window when most people engage. 2 seconds. In a real scenario, that could mean I know what it could mean. But, she got it right, he said. Both threats. Non-threats untouched. Collateral minimization. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. You know what that 2-second pause was? What? She was making sure, he said. She waited until she was sure. He said it with the quiet weight of someone who has been in situations where being sure costs seconds and seconds cost everything, and who still, having waited, had come down on the side of sure. He took a drink of his coffee. "She's going to be something," he said. I looked at the board. Ruiz, M. In dry erase marker, next to numbers that weren't the story. "She already is," I said. I drove back in the same late afternoon light as 2 years before. California making its argument. The same drive. Different everything. I thought about Marcus Ruiz, who had stood at an equipment cage for 6 years watching his daughter build a room he couldn't enter and had done it with a love that I recognized as the hardest kind, the kind that requires you to let a person go somewhere you can't follow and trust that wherever they go, the thing you gave them goes with them. I thought about Mara's 14 green notepads under a bed in San Diego, all the days of process over outcome, all the sessions of I moved too early and I need to wait for the second indicator, all the quiet conversations at 100 yards that had nothing to do with targets and everything to do with them. I thought about the record board. Dry erase marker. The dog photo. The way it would look in 10 years when Mara Ruiz was whatever she was going to be and someone walked past that hallway and looked at those 3 entries and made a decision about what kind of story they were reading. They'd probably think it was a story about records. About a girl who walked into a room full of Navy SEALs and broke every score on the board and walked out while they stood there with their mouths open, which is the version people share because it is satisfying in the specific way that stories about the dismissal and subsequent triumph of the dismissed are satisfying, and I'm not saying that story is wrong. I'm saying it's incomplete. The complete version has an 8-year-old going to the range every day after school. The complete version has a father standing at a cage trying to be invisible. The complete version has a 2-second pause before the trigger pull because she wanted to be sure, and sure cost seconds and she paid them anyway, and she was still right. The complete version ends not with the board but with a girl in the anteroom, 16 years old, green notepad in her hands, telling the Federal Observer that she's leaving. Not because she's done. Because she's found out what she's capable of here, and now she needs to find out what she's capable of somewhere else, and the only way to do that is to go. She's home, Marcus Ruiz had written, after the hospital. First thing. Before anything else. She's home. I thought about that all the way back to the city. I thought about where home is when you've built the room yourself. I thought about the green notepads under the bed. And about the one she walked out of Coronado still carrying, with its running log of process and its margin notes and its private accounting of what she'd done right and what she needed to fix, and one small entry, at the bottom of the last page, that I saw when she turned it over and that I have never included in any federal document and am including here now because she told me she wanted someone to write it down. Today I said goodbye. I don't know what comes next. That's okay. End.